Welcome back to another Revit Tools video. In this video we'll be covering more dimensions. This is part 3 of dimensions. In this video specifically, the spot elevation, spot coordinate, and spot slope. If you missed part 1 and 2, please go watch those first. I cover very in-depth type properties of what follows most of the dimensions. You'll find most of these dimensions have similar type properties, so you can find that in part 1. You'll see both links to part 1 and 2 in the comment section in the description below. Let's get right into it. We're going to start with the spot elevation. So if I click spot elevation, and if I'm in 3D, I can spot elevation anywhere. I can select even the floor here. I've got 0, 210 to the countertops. Absolutely anything can give me that dimension. If I look at the top here in the green bar, I have the option of showing a leader. I'm actually going to draw this out so we can see this. I can show the leader or the shoulder. The leader is that arrow from the point there to the end of the arrow, and the shoulder is the line that comes straight off of the spot elevation. I can also choose a relative base, so I could choose, in this case, I have 2 levels. I have level 1 and 2. I can choose the current level, which in a 3D view likely is level 1. So I can choose level 1 or level 2 as the relative base, basically where this is going to be giving me my elevation from. And I can also prefer wall center lines or faces if I'm going to a specific place in the wall. That's not necessarily a big deal most of the time because, like you can see here, all the walls, they're flat and there's no angles, nothing to worry about there. So let's look at the type properties real quick of the dimension of the spot elevation. The main thing here to be aware of is that the default will be to project base point. You're typically going to want to keep that because it's a spot elevation. You're trying to elevate from a specific point, and generally you've set the project base point as your origin, as where you're starting from. I've seen people start at 0, 0, 0, that's fine, whereas in this project as default it's set to 0, 0. But in others, the way I work most of the time, I've got all my level 1s at 100 feet. So instead of saying 0, 0 would technically be 100. So again, you can set that through your project base point. Survey point, it functions just the same. If you want to go off the survey point, you can. I can't see a world where you'd want to use spot elevations that are based on the survey point unless it's just for tracking survey points. I can't quite speak to that. And internal origin is actually new in Revit 2020. I would again, it's kind of applies the same as the project base point because you can set that specifically. I tend to not mess with it. Project base point you're generally fine with. Rotate with component, you can have this rotate with your different components. If you rotate the components, not a huge deal. Into the graphics section, leader arrowhead, you could change this arrowhead to appear differently. Again, it's not a huge deal. You can get it looking however you want. You can change the line weights of some of these lines, make them bigger, thicker, whatever you might want to be. I've got thin lines on so we can't see this. Let me turn those off so we can. So I made that just slightly thicker so we could see it better. These colors, you can change it to a different color, hit apply. Now you can see all of that is red. Doesn't necessarily help my spot elevation symbol. I'll select it again and change this back to black. Symbol, I can change my symbol to a crosshair, so I don't have any of that information, that target that's filled. I like the target that's filled. It is kind of universally known as an elevation marker. The width, you've seen this before. It's just changing the width factor. So I put that at half. It's going to be half as wide. I can underline, bold it, italicize any of that I want to do specifically for presentation purposes. Suppress spaces. If I get a bunch of extra spaces in here through adding prefixes and all that, I can suppress those. Maybe I put multiple spaces by accident, and if you have that checked, you're just going to get the default amount of spaces. Text size, text offset from leader. This is kind of nice. Maybe you don't want this text interfering with this marker at all, so you can make this different. So it's going to move away from that shoulder line. Most of the time it's not a big deal. You can change the font, the text background from opaque to transparent. I'll leave it at opaque, and if I move this over to the wall, you can see that it's cutting out this door and wall there. But as soon as I change that to transparent, that will become visible. The wall and door in the background will be visible. I'll leave that back at opaque. The unit formats, this is kind of nice. I typically don't, like I've said before in the previous dimension videos, I always typically use 1/8 of an inch. So I'm ended up rounding all these numbers to 1/8 of an inch just so it's a little easier to understand, and typically contractors will not measure out to a 32nd of an inch. It's just not going to happen. Alternate units, this works just the same as linear dimensions. I can put this as millimeters, for example, and I can see the millimeters off to the side. Again, I have no millimeters because I'm on level 1 exactly. You can put that on the left or right side, or actually the right side or below, specifically for spot elevations. I don't need to see that necessarily. You've got more alternate units with a prefix, a suffix, text symbol, text offset from symbol. That's just the offset from the symbol itself. So if that's a half, you can see that the text moves away from that target symbol a little more. Text orientation, horizontal. I can make this vertical if I want to for some reason. That's nice to easily do that. Text location, I can make that from above the leader to below the leader, or in line with the leader. So you can see it right there. It kind of, because it's opaque, it's going to just ruin the whole symbol. I don't really want to do that necessarily because I do like the symbol. It tells you what it is. Elevation indicator, I don't typically keep one, but you could maybe put EL there and it'll give you elevation and specify the elevation. You can have a top and a bottom indicator just like you can, and you can have a prefix suffix for the top and bottom. You can kind of take this as far as you want to. So that's the basics of the type properties for the spot elevation. If I look over here, I could, for the instance parameters, I can simply turn the leader off. I can turn the shoulder off if I just want the leader. That looks kind of funny, but you can see how that works. I can add a prefix and a suffix here. So I'll put pre, and this will be my upper, and I can also do a pre, or I can do a suffix there for my suffix. So pre, suffix, there it is. Works just the same as instance parameters. It's very nice. You could do this. You can have different values for every single spot elevation you have in the project. You can add different ones there. That was a quick rundown of the type properties of the spot elevation. Now let's go to different places where you might use spot elevations. Now I've used them in elevations for sure. You could obviously use them in 3D, but another place is in ceiling plans. And I'll go to a level 1 ceiling plan. I've got a ceiling up here, and if I go to annotate and spot elevation, you can see the relative base is current level, and that's because these are just the default types that Revit has set up. And if I choose relative, this is going to say that it's using the project base point and it's going to be relative to the current level. Whereas if I choose project, that means that this spot elevation will be relative to the project. And what that really means is that if you use the spot elevation on a higher level, that it's going to basically start from 0 and count up. Whereas if I choose current level, a reference being the current level, then it's just going to count from that level up. So let's say I'll start with the relative because it makes more sense. If I've got the ceiling, it's 8 feet above the finished floor. You can clearly see that right there, but you could also see that information. If I click on the ceiling itself, you can see height offset from level is set to 8. So at this point, that's great. I don't necessarily need to do anything else, but once I click on it again, I can choose if I want I have different display elevations. I can choose a top, and what this top elevation is, it's the elevation at the top of the ceiling at this point. So this ceiling, if I'm judging the ceiling correctly, it's 2¼ inches. So let's look at the ceiling and go into the thickness there. Yep, it's 2¼ inches. I can click on the spot elevation again. I can't say, I will say, actually, I haven't used the top elevation. It's kind of weird, but maybe you need to know where that top elevation of the ceiling is. I will say if you do that, you might want to use both the top and bottom elevation. So what this is saying is the bottom there is the bottom of the ceiling, so it's at 8 feet above the finished floor. And the top value is, again, that top elevation or the top of the ceiling at 8 2¼ It's very nice. You can prefer different parts of the wall. We've already been over that. Usually isn't a big deal for spot elevations. What I'm going to do now is I'll delete this spot elevation. I'm going to copy all of this information, and I will align that to a selected level of level 2. So now what I'll do, I've got the same thing on level 2. I'm going to go to ceiling plane level 2, and now if I go to a spot elevation that is project, target being the project, now you can see I'm at 18 feet. And that's kind of weird. Why am I at 18 feet? Well, I'm at 18 feet because the difference between level 1 and 2 is 10 feet, and the height from level 2 in this case is 8 feet, so that 10 plus 8. Again, if you're using relative to the project, it's going to start from the base point, which is probably 0 or 100 or wherever you've started it, and it's just going to count straight up. That's nice if you need to know that distance. I don't necessarily need that like if you're just doing one ceiling, I don't necessarily need that. If you need like an exterior element that's sitting out on a column, you need the height of that's probably where you might begin to use that. So I'm going to go back to 3D now and go to spot elevation. And if I change my spot elevation to internal origin, then I have some different properties that I can mess with. So let's place this just on the ground level for now. And you can see my relative base it's set at current level, but I can actually change this to level 1 or 2. So if I were to change this to level 1, nothing will happen because that spot elevation is on level 1. Not a big deal. If I've changed this to level 2, now the spot elevation is negative 10 feet. And why is that? That's because if the relative base, basically where I'm starting this measurement from, is on level 2 being 10 feet above, the fact that this is on level 1, the spot elevation is on level 1, that will be my minus 10. That's where it's getting the minus 10 from. Something to be aware of. I can change the relative base right here, just like I can up here. It's all the same. And like before, I can also get any different point that I want in the project. Not a big deal. And I can now freely change the association of these if I want to, because I have this type set up as internal origin. The internal origin is, in fact, because it's a default project, set at 0, 0, 0, just like the project base point. So I can change this current level to level 2, and in this case, this wall is 10 feet above level 2. Makes perfect sense. And for this spot elevation, it probably should be level 1. So I'll change that to level 1. That makes sense, so that sink is 12 feet above level 1. Turns out it's on level 2, so let's change that to level 2, and you can see that that sink is now showing as 2 feet 10 above level 2. Perfect, makes sense. I've covered this in a previous video, but what you can do actually with 3D views, you can see these kind of get distorted. It's kind of a mess. Once you start rotating around, it's nice that you can still see them and they'll rotate, but it's based on the plane in which you draw it in originally. So if I draw another spot elevation here, this target will be in the plane that my window is in right now, and as I circle around it, I can see that it's in that plane. That's great. But what I want to do is keep these readable. And you can see that this is a bit unreadable now. It's kind of stupid. And what I have to do now is I have to adjust it slightly to get it to kind of update to where my camera is now. And having to do this all the time is kind of a pain in my mind. So what you can do is come down here to the house with the lock button. If you hover over it, it says unlocked 3D view. I can save orientation and lock, and now I'm prompted to save this as a different 3D view. And I'll just call this spot elevations. And now, at this point, all the elevations, they look great. And I can't orbit around anymore. I'm stuck. I've essentially locked the view. That's what I've done. So now I can easily draw spot elevations that show up really well. They're always going to be readable when I come back to this view. So it's really nice to know. I'm going to select all these in view, and I'll delete those. So now let's go to spot coordinate. Spot coordinate is very similar to spot elevation because it's going to function the exact same, but it's just what it's looking at. So spot coordinates, if we go into the type properties, they're going to look at the survey point. And you can have them look at other things, but typically you're going to set the survey point. It's going to be a certain point on your site that you get from a survey, likely. You've got all these different options that are very similar, if not the same, to the spot elevation, as far as anything that's graphical or anything that is giving you a specific coordinate. So the difference being, spot coordinates are going to give you a coordinate on the site. It's based on a site survey. So as I move around, again, this is based on 0, 0, 0. All of my spot elevations are going to be updated, and I can only do this on horizontal surfaces in this case. Let's go back to the default 3D view here so I can orbit around again. And you can see all these north and east, southwest, whatever you want to call them, all these coordinate information is being updated. It's going to look and function just like any spot coordinate or spot elevation, sorry. I can, again, turn the leaders off, add prefixes, suffixes, not a big deal, but some of the main differences are down here because they involve north or south or east or west. You could have the top value change from north and south to east and west and vice versa. You could flip those. I can include the elevation. This is kind of nice. If you want to see both the spot coordinate information and current elevation or spot elevation information in one, you could have that checked and you could see that elevation. So let's draw another one, and if I come up here, I could see that I have the coordinate information as well as the elevation of that wall based on 0, 0, 0. And it's all based on the survey point, so that's all going to be from the project base point likely also. So it's going to be, that elevation is going to be from 0, 0, 0 or some base point, which is why it's at 20 and not relative to the level. It's different for spot elevations. So that's really it. That is for spot elevations anyway. They're very similar to spot coordinates, spot elevation, pretty much the same. So that's good. So finally, spot slope. When I click spot slope, I have just a couple of options here. One is, do I want to represent that as a slope arrow? And I can't even change that right now because of the view I'm in, but offset from reference, and the reference being where it's getting the information from. In this case, it's just the floor. If I highlight, or if I go over any floor here, because this floor is flat, I get no slope, which, I mean, obviously that's what you kind of want to see if there's no slope. You could change that to different values. So let's go to the edit type here, and we can see most of this graphical information is the same. You can get that slope direction. You can change that from up to down. I would always keep that at down. It doesn't necessarily matter because it's going to give you the same value versus up or down because it's the same slope. But you probably want to have it pointed down. That's just what I'm thinking. The leader line length, you can set that as 1 inch. I'll show you that once we get an actual slope going. And finally, really all this is the same when it comes to other dimensions, but the thing to be aware of here is the units. So by default, it's set to rise over 1 foot. Now maybe you want to do a ratio, the ratio being 1 to 12, or maybe you want even a percentage that's under 5%. You want to make sure that you're under 5% for parking or something like that. I end up using percentage a lot, and then I'll use a ratio to better show that the ratio is falling within code or something like that. So let's get I'll make a couple of ramps here. let's go to ramp, and I'm going to ramp from level 1 to level 1, and let's do 5 feet. And I'll ramp, and I'll make my ramp 10 feet long, just for the heck of it. I'll hit OK, and there's our ramp. I'll delete these railings, so when I zoom in on the ramp, I can go to annotate, spot slope, and as soon as I find that ramp, I can see I'm at 1 inch over a foot, or 1 inch per foot. 1 inch of rise per 1 foot of run. That's great. So as soon as I click that, I can see that I've got that opaque text. I can change that offset from reference to a different value if I want to change that, and draw another one. I'll make that a 4th. Not a big deal. Don't really end up changing that most of the time. Usually doesn't matter. Again, I got the prefer wall center lines or whatever. You can tab to those just like you can anything else. I'll go back to the type here, and now maybe you want to make that leader line length different. Maybe I need this to be shorter. Maybe I just want it to be just as long as the text in this case. I can make that half, and the line itself is now shorter. I can go back to the units, and maybe we want this to be a percentage, and maybe I want to see at least 1 decimal place. I'll hit OK and apply, and see that that's 8.3%. That's my ramp. It's telling me that it's still a ramp. That's good to know. I could also change that to a basic ratio, and I can hit apply, and again, it's 8.3. It's perfect. Change that to ratio. Actually, I'll hit apply, and there it is. It's 1 to 12, which is 8.33%. Works perfectly. That's everything we might want to do with a ramp. So now, the main reason I end up using spot slopes is, yes, I use it for ramps, obviously, and you need to know the slope of ramps to determine if that ramp is the code and you're able to use that. I want to change this back to percentage, but I use this a lot for site grading. So what I want to do now is I will take this floor, I'm just going to copy it way the hell over here. I'll take this floor, and I'm going to add a bunch of points, just random points throughout. And what I'm going to do now is change some of these points to different values. I'll make that 1 foot, make that 1 foot, make that 2, make that 1, make this 3. So now I've got this floor that's got a bunch of different slopes, and the reason I would use a floor instead of topography is because of this. I can better control where points need to be, and I can also use spot elevations on these actual points. So that's 1 foot above finished floor in this case. This point over here is 3 feet above finished floor. So that's perfect. So what do I need to do now? I need to make sure that some of these slopes are, maybe it's a parking lot, maybe it's, the biggest thing might be if it's a path for egress. If it's on site, it needs to be less than 5%. So in this case, 5% there, that's fine. 10.7, that will not work. But the nice thing is that I can leave these values here, and I can continue to update the floor in this case. So maybe I need to work on this specific value. First I want to do is add a percentage to that. Percentage, great. Okay, so there's my percent. And as I update this floor, I will have new values for my percents, which is perfect. So maybe I need to make sure that these values again are under 5%, and so I can slowly adjust this point to where all the values around it are under 5%. So like I can see clearly now that 1'5" works for this, but it doesn't work for that, so I need to keep going. So I'll change that to 1'3", and now I can see that 1 foot 3 inches above finished floor for this specific spot works perfectly. That's the main reason why I would use spot slopes beyond ramps, because it's really helpful to make sure you're falling within code for all the slopes that you have throughout the site. That's going to be part 3 of dimensions. In that we covered the spot elevation, spot coordinate, and spot slope. If you learned something, please demolish that like button. It really helps. Also subscribe. And if you missed part 1 and 2, what are you doing here? This is part 3. Go check out part 1 and 2. We cover so much more with all the other dimension types. I sure hope you found this video helpful. Have a great day, and thanks for watching.